Hi, my name is Andy and I'm a product trainer with PerfectForms. We have put together a series of video tutorials to help you get started with designing your forms. The tutorials are designed to be interactive. You can follow the demonstrations, pausing the video whenever you want to try it out for yourself. Use the navigation bar at the foot of the screen to pause, restart, rewind, or fast forward the video. Before you can start to build your form using PerfectForms, you need to have a good solid plan in place. Investing time wisely in a plan can save you time in the design stage, even if you know in your own mind how you want the form to work. If you're building a form on behalf of a colleague, it is doubly important to work on a plan to identify all the aspects of the process that you need to consider in your design. Let me give you an analogy to explain what I mean. Let's say that I am after a vehicle that will get me to the shops and keep me dry. Well, most vehicles will do this. I might end up with a sports car, or I might end up with a truck. Both fit the description, but neither would be ideal for a shopping trip. So where should you start when there is so much information to gather? What I hope to do in this presentation is give you some pointers about how to approach the task and what information to ask for. The first thing to consider is who to speak to. The first tip for today is to start with the process owners. They are the ones that understand how it should work and will know what is expected as the end result. If you are the process owner as well as the form designer, then do take the time to ask yourself the questions and get the answers down in writing. Don't forget the process users. They will have a different viewpoint and will often be able to suggest improvements or be able to identify pain points in the process. If you are designing forms for existing processes, check to see if the users have any job aids that they've created for themselves. It may be possible to incorporate them into the design. So what do you need to know? In short, you need to know everything about the process. Otherwise, how can you possibly build it right the first time? When it comes to asking the right questions, here are the main topics that you should be considering. We'll look at each topic in more detail later. How should the forms look and feel? A brief description of how the process works. More specific detail will be covered in later steps. One of the most important topics, what does the user want to achieve? Then you can start to look at the process in a bit more detail, starting with defining the logical stages in the process. What roles will individuals or groups play in the process? And how will the forms progress through the different stages? What information will be fed into the forms at the different stages and what decisions will be made? Will any data be taken from or passed into any external data sources? And finally, the catch-all question to get anything not covered in the previous topics. Let's take a look at each topic in more detail. Remember to ask if any paper forms or templates already exist. It can help to have some place to start from, but do also remember to check if there are any known issues or changes that need to be made to improve the existing forms. Most paper forms will be in portrait view, and many users will prefer to have their electronic forms looking just like their paper forms. Landscape view is more suited to computer and laptop screens, so check the preferred orientation and dimensions. Consider also the possibility of scrolling a form on screen. Generally, most users will accept scrolling up and down, but will not always appreciate scrolling left to right. Check if printing will be required at any time in the process. If it is, then your form dimensions should be set accordingly. Forms without logos and colours do not look so great even if they do function just the same. Colours can be used to separate different sections of the form on the same page. We recommend a maximum of 3 main colours, using different shades of those colours for effect. The next topic to consider is a summary of the whole process. It is important to identify the start point in a process. How will each instance be triggered? Will it be a link in a public website, via a restricted access portal, or something else? Get a brief description of the process from start to finish. Remember that more specific information can be obtained on a step-by-step basis later. Where, if anywhere, will the process finish? When it does finish, what will be the required outcome? It could be a simple decision communicated by a confirmation email. A value perhaps? Data? Or a report? The important thing is that you need to know what is supposed to come out of the system, as it could affect what data you have to collect and how it might need to be manipulated. At this point, you need to start to look at the process in more detail, starting with the different logical stages the process will move through. It might be a simple process, or it could be a more complex one. Either way, it is necessary to have it defined and drawn out somewhere. Your diagram, whether it is on paper, directly in PerfectForms, or somewhere else, will need to identify the start point, the interim stages that the process may pass through, and the endpoints. There is no practical limit to the number of stages you can define, so it is better to define too many than too few. Please don't confuse user roles with users, as there is a difference. To explain, let's take a simple purchase order request. It is quite possible that in one instance you might be the applicant, but in another you might be the manager making the approval. So when we talk of user roles, we mean the roles specific to the process and not the individuals who may be involved with various different instances of the process. Identify the role that starts the process off. Typically this might be applicant or requester or something like that. Identify the other roles applicable during the process. Remember that you might have individuals accessing the process to add or modify data or to make decisions, but you may also have individuals accessing for information only. The roles are used to define access rights to the form's data. Once the roles are defined, then you can consider how to identify the individual users who will occupy those roles on a case-by-case basis. Could it be using a directory service, such as Active Directory, or perhaps a lookup into a database, or manual entry by users? Another thing to consider is whether the forms will be routed to individuals or to groups. If the requests are routed to groups, consider how many members of the group might interact with the forms. Will the first member to open a request take sole ownership of that task, or could any member of the group access the task at any time? We touched briefly on the subject of routing a request to another individual or group. That leads us on to the next topic, which is stage transition rules. Most processes will have a number of triggers that will be used to move the request through the different stages. Sometimes a request will always move to the next stage, but often there will be certain conditions that need to be met before any stage progression is made. The conditions could be simple, often based on the value or condition of a single field in the form, or they could be more complex, based on two or more fields. In order for any condition to be met, it is necessary for the users to interact with the form, to add or modify the data contained within it. There are two things to consider: the type of data that might be entered, and the access rights for different roles at different stages of the process. It is important that you know the type of data that will be entered into the form by the different users. One of the most common is free text data, but there are several others: numeric, dates, and times, checkboxes if multiple selections are made, or radio buttons if only a single selection. Lists and drop-downs can force the users to choose from a predefined list. Files may also be attached subject to certain file size restrictions. Check the likely file size if attachments are going to be made. The next thing to consider is what data field on your form might have at different stages and for different roles. Mandatory fields might be controlled in this way, but more typically this is how you would prevent an applicant from approving their own request by limiting their access. There are a few different states that need to be considered, starting with mandatory fields. Fields can be read-only, so any data can be seen but not changed, or they can be hidden from view, or disabled, so they are greyed out and cannot be changed. It may be necessary for your process to talk to external sources of data. PerfectForms can integrate with several different types of data source. Web services can provide data, as can other PerfectForms forms. Either of these can be achieved without any external modules being installed. To integrate with databases, directory services, or CSV files, it is necessary to install a connection agent alongside the source of data. So check if the connection agent has been installed. Check what event will trigger the integration, what data is to be transferred, and where should it be stored. Finally, we come to the section that covers everything else not mentioned above. Every process will be different in one way or another. The beauty of PerfectForms is that you are not forced to stick to predefined templates, but you can modify any process to suit specific individual needs. In order to do this, however, it is necessary to understand precisely what is required. With experience, you will learn what sort of things to ask about. But in the early stages, it is best to ask some open questions and see where the answers take you. Do not be afraid to ask more questions than you think might be necessary. And if you can't figure out how to achieve what the process owner wants there and then, do give yourself some time to consider it and get back to them later. That concludes the presentation on planning your process. I hope that you've enjoyed and learnt something from the presentation. You should now be able to approach your process owners with the confidence necessary to collect the information required to build your forms right the first time of asking. Thank you.